Hey everybody, I want to welcome you to another episode of Knowledge Basics. Today we're talking about troubleshooting and video systems. Hey, my name is Bruce Gilson, and you've started a brand new series with us, and it's about troubleshooting. And we're gonna have a series of videos, some about video, some about audio, and some about lighting, so that you can begin to get better at trying to identify what's the problem and how do I fix it. That's what our troubleshooting series is all about. In today's video, we're looking at video systems. If you have watched our video about introduction to prints and basic elements, you might recognize this system because we used this system as a reference in that video. And here's our problem today is we have an intermittent video problem happening with TV1, all right? In this particular example, TV1 sometimes works and then sometimes doesn't work. Intermittent problems are the worst. The worst! Because guess when they work? When we show up. But guess when they don't work? When we're gone. And that's what's so annoying about intermittent problems. But we have a way to tackle this problem, so hopefully you know what to do next. Okay, so here we go. We've got our video switchers on this side. We've got our SDI cables that are transmitting the video. We've got our video hub in the middle. This is in the rack room. We've got more SDI cables coming off. They hit converters behind the televisions. And then we have HDMI cables, which is our distribution, coming to our output of our TVs. TV2 is happy. TV2 doesn't have any problems. But TV1 is intermittent. It's got problems back and forth. So what do we do? How do we begin to troubleshoot this problem, all right? The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna start with the problem area, okay? Now, while this is the whole system, I don't wanna start like in the middle of the system. I don't wanna start at the end where we don't know if there's a problem there. Why don't we start right here and try to identify, is the problem the TV itself, right? That's a pretty good place to start. What is really, really important, the number one takeaway of this video, we're gonna put it in a big giant banner. Work through the process in order. Don't jump around. If you jump around, you're never really gonna be able to rule out problems. So work in order. Got it? Don't forget it. All right, so we're gonna work in order. We're gonna start with our television itself. Now, one of the ways that we can check our TV is we can pull it off the wall, and we could take this line right here that's going to TV2 that we know works because TV2 doesn't have any problems. And we could take this line and put this HDMI cable inside of this television. And if that doesn't blink and flicker, it helps us know that our problem is not with TV1. Or we could change TV1 to a different source, right? We could plug our computer into HDMI 1. Let's say that this converter's plugged into HDMI 1. We could take our computer, plug it in HDMI 1, and if our computer has no problems, then the problem's not with the TV. But let's say that you plug your computer in and all of a sudden the TV's still flickering and you're on a totally different video source. Well, now we know that we've got a problem with our TV, right? So we wanna rule that TV out first. We wanna know that our TV is not the problem, okay? The next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna check the inputs. We're gonna see, do we have a bad input on HDMI 1? Can we switch to HDMI 2 and try HDMI 2 a little bit differently? So most televisions have 3 HDMI ports, and maybe in the process, HDMI 1 got damaged, right? So we can try a different input, change it on our remote, look at it, and if the problem goes away, then maybe the simple problem is we just take it out of HDMI 1, put it in HDMI 2, and we're done. We can also check these HDMI cables, right? So maybe the HDMI cable itself got damaged. One way I can rule out the HDMI cables is I could take this cable and I can move it and put it right here. And if this cable goes right here and it just replaces this one and it's still intermittent problems, well then it's not my HDMI cable. Now, What you may notice is I'm starting to work in order. Oh, think about it for a second. So what would be the next thing that we would check if we're working in order? The next thing that we're gonna check is our SDI converters, okay? Maybe we've got a converter that's overheating and it's starting to have some heat issues and it's turning itself off. So how can I solve that? I can swap these two converters because we know that this one is working fine. So if this one's working fine and I take this converter and I move it to right here, and if I do that and then this one still has an intermittent problem, it's not the converter. Or maybe it fixes it and then you go, aha! Aha! I figured it out. It's the converter. The converter's having issues, okay? So I wanna rule out my converter. And now I'm starting to work in a systematic fashion and I'm ruling out problems as I'm moving down the video system. The next thing, I can check these SDI cables that are coming into the system. So I could take this SDI cable and I can put it into this converter and see if that solves the problem. Because now I'm ruling out this line and I'm checking to see, I know that this line's good because TV2 has no problems. So I plug it into my converter and see if that solves the problem. And if that doesn't solve the problem, I put it back and now I keep moving down the signal chain, all right? So I can use some form of deductive reasoning about my video hub. The video hub is working to TV2, and in a larger venue that has a video hub, there's probably multiple destinations, multiple places that that video hub is going. I could check all of those. And if really my only problem is with TV1, it's most likely not my video hub. So I'm gonna then move backwards again, check the SDI and the other groups. So now I'm inside this chain right here. Now, let's assume that these two locations are not close to each other. Let's assume they're like a floor apart from one another. And I can't easily go check this stuff. There's gonna be a couple of other ways I could verify these cables to make sure. If from the video hub, let's just assume that this is in a rack room, from the video hub to this wall plate, that's all in the wall, in the ceiling, in conduit, it's all protected. The chances of it going bad is slim. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. You can get mice that get into stuff and they start chewing on things and ruin our lives, but it's unlikely that you're gonna have a problem inside of here. So this is gonna be a kind of a lower priority, but from a wall plate to the switcher, this is now exposed. This is in the area of the operator. This is in the area of human beings. And we know that humans create way more problems than mice do.
People and technology are a bad match.
So this now becomes a pretty high culprit for me to go, well, you know what? I know that I'm good all the way to here. I wonder if I've got a problem here. I can rule out this by putting another source into this SDI plate and sending that down the chain. If I take, I don't know, maybe I go grab this little ATEM, because I know this guy's working fine. I go grab this ATEM from the second floor and I just bring that device down and I plug it in and I send signal. If that begins to work, well then now I've finally ruled out my problem, or I've at least discovered my problem. Or if I don't have that, maybe I've got another converter, I can send it a converter. So just think about some ways that you might be able to test the wall plate, okay? Then the last thing we're gonna do at this ATEM and at this wall plate is we're gonna wiggle and jiggle everything. Because let's be honest, as installers, we're working fast, we're connecting our SDI cables pretty quickly, we're stripping and ripping. And if you haven't watched the SDI series, make sure you go watch that because it's got all the information you need about what I'm talking about, and you can make mistakes. And so let's say that you've made a mistake and it's not perfect and you wiggle and jiggle the cable and all of a sudden your image starts flickering. Aha! now we know that we've got a problem. So I'm not talking about like ripping the cable. I'm just talking about bumping and, kind of wiggling and making sure that it's nice and secure. I will say that the most common issue that you're gonna find in this type of setup is a bad cable. Now that doesn't mean that it's your cable that's bad. Could have been somebody else. Or it could be an HDMI cable that's gone bad. But most likely, I'm gonna assume that when we installed all this gear and we tested it the first time and it's all working fine, that it's probably gonna be my cables, not my equipment. Now, let's kind of recap, okay? Let's recap some things that we've talked about. We're gonna start with the problem area. We're gonna check our TVs. We're gonna check our TV inputs. We're gonna check the cables leading into the TVs. Then we're gonna check the SDI converters. And then we're gonna check the cables leading into the SDI converters. And then we're gonna check the video hub. Does the video work everywhere else? If it does, it's probably not your video hub. Then we're gonna check your other SDI group cables, all the other types. We're gonna make sure that our connectors and our cables are good by wiggling and jiggling. And we're gonna remember that we're humans, and a lot of times the problem is actually a poorly terminated cable, okay? So in this specific example, I actually pulled this from something that happened in reality. And guess what? It ended up being a bad SDI connection at our ATEM switcher. And it wasn't until I went through the entire process that I found that we just had a bad connection, okay? We had a connection that had gotten loose over time, and it was sometimes working and sometimes not working, which is obviously the most frustrating part about an intermittent problem. It would have been very difficult to find that if I hadn't gone through the process. In this particular example, it took me 45 minutes to go from the television down the entire chain to the ATEM switcher. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but they had other technicians look at the problem, and it took them multiple hours over multiple days, and they never solved the problem. Most likely because they played with this, and then they went and played with this, and then they tried this, and they weren't systematically working through the problem. And that's really the main key here, is for you to think through systematically. All right, we've covered a lot of information here. I want to give you just a quick bullet list of tips so that you can try to drill it into the old noggin, all right? Here we go. First thing, start with the problem area. If you've got a bad TV, start with the TV. Don't start at the other side because you might, and don't start in the middle. That's the worst, okay? Don't start in the middle. Start with the problem area. Number two, cables have a lot of failure. The chances of there being a cable problem is really high. So kind of prioritize checking cables, swapping cables, checking the input adapters, stuff like that, okay? Number two, user errors. Now, humans aren't perfect. We're gonna have some human error problems. One problem could be that they're pushing the wrong buttons. Unfortunately, we see this a lot. I call them carbon-based errors, where the user is just not trained properly and they think something's not working, but they're just pushing the wrong button, okay? Or, especially in the case of televisions that are hung on walls, a lot of times you have a lot of stuff that you're trying to fit behind that TV and you're just smashing a whole bunch of cables. Or in a floor pocket, there's a lot of stuff going on in a floor pocket or a wall plate. There's a lot of stuff going on and you just, cramming all those cables in there and you're smashing them, and then you're making them bad. You're giving them a problem, okay? Don't want to smash your cables too bad. You could have programming errors. Programming errors are typically found in the commissioning process, but sometimes we don't test everything perfectly, and so we think that this button's supposed to be going that location, but in reality that button's going a different location, and it's the user that finds that. And so we've got to be prepared for programming errors. There could be a whole lot of things, and this isn't really designed to be an in-depth video. This is like an introduction, a 101 video, okay? But use your critical thinking skills as you're thinking through the different problems. Now, if you're the type of person that you learn best when you hear a story, you're gonna love this series because we're gonna give some real life examples of how this has applied to our experiences doing AV video troubleshooting. All right, so the system that we talked about today, that's a system that we deployed inside of a comedy club. And that actual system, that was a real problem. The TVs were in a green room. They were in one area. The two ATEM switchers were in two different studios, and those were in a long, far away location, and the rack room was in a different location. And it was a fairly complicated problem to try to troubleshoot. And so when I got there, the very first thing I did is took the TV off the wall and I began to try to figure out, hey, what's going on with the devices behind it? Do I see any bad cables, anything smashed? And I'm just working myself through the process. Without giving you like all the boring details, when I finally get to the end of this, we had the ATEM switcher on a desk and all the SDI cables are coming in, and we addressed them in such a way that they were all tied together so that if somebody were to move the ATEM switcher, all those cables are moving in unison as one. We were hoping that that was gonna be good enough. But what we didn't anticipate is the operators actually taking the ATEM and moving it out of their way so that they could use the desktop. And that's ultimately what happened, is that they would take the ATEM and they were kind of shoving it off into the corner of the desk so that then they could put their laptop down or something like that on the operator's desk. And the SDI cable that was the furthest away from our whole connection point started getting tons of stress on it, and they were smashing the cable. And so that's why sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, because the ATEM, when they shoved it into the corner, it wouldn't work. But when they pulled it back into their operator position, it would straighten up that SDI cable and it would start working again. Man, that was a really frustrating thing. So you gotta think about that. You gotta think about like, hey, how am I preparing this front of house in such a way that it can survive real life issues? And in that particular example, we just made a miscalculation on where and how that ATEM was gonna get moved. Video problems have gotten a lot better since we've moved into the digital age. In the analog days, I would see a whole lot more things like scrolling and flickering and colors being off and stuff. In the digital age, we don't see that all that often. And to be honest, I'm grateful for it, because chasing down a scroll in a screen was so annoying. Digital land, we don't have those problems like we used to, okay? Luckily. Typically what happens in video now is it either works or it doesn't work. That's normally our problems now in video land. But you could, if it's not working, you gotta work through the problem and you gotta try to figure out, why is it not working? So let's just say it's not an intermittent problem, my TV just doesn't work. I am gonna probably start the same process. I'm gonna just plug my laptop straight into that TV and make sure that we've got a good unit. And if that unit's good, then I'm gonna add my, check the HDMI cable and make sure that the HDMI cable's good. And then I'm gonna check that, SDI converter, and I'm gonna work down the process. If it's a really large, complicated building, maybe there's a chance where you say, oh, I'm gonna start with the problem. And if it's not the problem, I'm actually gonna go back to the beginning. But as you get better at troubleshooting, you're gonna kind of figure that stuff out. So that's my real life story of how I made some mistakes and I had to come back and troubleshoot. If you're enjoying the content, always make sure you hit like, make sure you subscribe. You can send a comment and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Otherwise, we'll see you on another episode of Knowledge Basics.